Hello everybody! Today we are revisiting the Ahsoka series 1 year later. Many people loved the first season of Ahsoka, saying it finally felt like Star Wars unlike most Star Wars shows. But many others criticized the show for relying too much on fan service to keep viewers entertained. After my initial review of the show, I claimed it fell just short of greatness. So how have my views on the series changed since I made that video? So in this video, we're gonna break down each episode of the show. We're gonna go through each one and see how well they hold up and how well they contributed to the overall narrative. At the end of the video, I'm also going to do a rewrite of the entire season. Then I'll wrap up the video with a brief reflection on the series 1 year later. So, let's begin. So the first episode begins with an opening crawl, one quite different from the Star Wars movies we are used to. Right away, this show has accomplished something that some of the other shows hadn't, and that's direction. The Mandalorian Season 3 was an abhorrent season of television. Amongst many issues that the show had, one was the lack of direction. Here's what I mean by that. After watching the first episode, can you tell me what the plot of this season will be? It's really quite simple. After the first season of The Mandalorian Season 1, could you tell me what that season would be about? Absolutely. This bounty hunter was tasked with hunting someone down, and that someone turned out to be a baby of the same species of Yoda. That was an excellent cliffhanger that gave the season momentum. With The Mandalorian Season 3, could you tell me what the season was about? Nope. It appears the season at first was about Mando regaining his honor, but that was accomplished at the end of the next episode. With Ahsoka, the opening crawl actually does an effective job at setting up the stakes and the plot of the show. The Empire has been defeated, the New Republic reigns. However, there are attempts to retrieve an exiled Imperial Grand Admiral that could start another war. Our heroes need to stop them. Boom, right away we know what the plot is. Now, of course, some viewers know who Thrawn is and some don't, but we'll touch on that in a bit. Ahsoka Season 1 was written by Star Wars legend Dave Filoni. Filoni has been involved with the franchise for a long time. He wrote the Clone Wars series along with George Lucas, then he became the sole lead showrunner on the animated series Star Wars Rebels, then once that concluded, he directed a few episodes of The Mandalorian, and now he had graduated to becoming a full-on showrunner of his first live-action series. Filoni's strengths when it comes to being a writer in Star Wars are no doubt his abilities to leave lifelong Star Wars fans satisfied. Some would call this an over-reliance on fan service, others would call it taking advantage of the vast franchise that is Star Wars. Regardless of that, however, considering this was his first time writing a live-action Star Wars series, I think it's obvious that he struggles with certain aspects of it. Great writing is like a web. Everything that happens is set up properly, and every little character beat or plot development feels organic and never forced. In animation, you can often get away with taking shortcuts here and there. For example, in Star Wars Rebels, like half the episodes involve the main characters entering an Imperial vessel. After the dozenth time of doing this, viewers just stop questioning how the Empire could be so incompetent that they move on. In the Ahsoka series, the New Republic has a prisoner. The plot demands that this prisoner be released. So these two dark Jedi show up and claim that they are Jedi and that they are there to see the prisoner. The New Republic captain has had no word of a Jedi coming to investigate, and he doesn't believe at all that they are Jedi in the first place. So what does he do? You'd think without proper clearance, he would simply reject the supposed Jedi. However, instead he decides to let them on the ship so he can call their bluff. What does he hope to accomplish? I have no clue. Maybe he wanted to arrest them, but either way it turns out that these Jedi are actually dark Jedi and they kill everyone. This was frankly a very silly way to start the series, to have the idiocy of one captain lead to the release of a prisoner. Some may call this a nitpick, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You want to know what a nitpick would be? Complaining that Baylan's skull could just use the Force to free Morgan of these handcuffs. Is that something you can do with the Force? Unlock things? It was done in Return of the Jedi, to be fair, but frankly Morgan being in handcuffs has no impact on the plot, so using this as a substantial criticism against the show would be silly. On the other hand, having the incompetence of a captain lead to the release of a prisoner, which sets things in motion that will inevitably lead to the start of another war, is absolutely not a nitpick. So little things like this, I think Dave Filoni Filoni still struggles with. But that doesn't mean the scene was a total failure. This is the first time in live action we have seen Dark Jedi. This is a new concept that can intrigue viewers and leave them wanting to see more. So Morgan is freed, we get a little title card, and then we meet Ahsoka for the first time. Now, depending on who you are, this may or may not be the first time you've seen Ahsoka. For many, it was the Clone Wars, for some it was the second season of The Mandalorian, and for some it was this moment right here. Ahsoka has a complicated legacy. She was the Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, arguably the most important character in Star Wars. Now, the writers must know that it is very likely a lot of people watching this show had not seen the Clone Wars. So how would Filoni handle the introduction of the character to some? Well, he doesn't really handle it at all. Easily my biggest criticism of the show is that if you had not watched the Clone Wars and Rebels, you are most likely going to be very lost. When we get to episode 5, you will see that a big part of her arc this season has to do with her balancing her legacy as Anakin's Padawan, something casual viewers of this show will have absolutely zero knowledge of. This idea of pre-required viewing is absolutely something Star Wars has struggled with lately. Movies like those in the MCU could get away with it. Why? Because they were movies. Shows, on the other hand, are not afforded that same luxury. When The Mandalorian came out, honestly, you didn't need to know anything else about the franchise to understand what was going on. But to be safe, it was probably best that you at least saw the original trilogy. At this point in the Star Wars franchise, the only thing that should be pre-required viewing for a show are the 9 main films. You may argue some points, like that with Andor you should have watched Rogue One. I completely disagree. In fact, you're probably better off not having seen Rogue One when watching Andor. This same line of thinking applies to the animated shows. Watching the Clone Wars, as long as you had seen the Star Wars prequels, you are good. Now what about a show like Star Wars Rebels? Shouldn't you have at least seen the Clone Wars? No. While it certainly helps at times, Rebels is completely a standalone show. Almost no elements of the Clone Wars are introduced in the first season of that show. What Rebels did excellently was develop its characters and its plot as if it was a standalone story in its first season, and then slightly expand from there in the subsequent seasons. Sure, you might be missing out on some of the emotional context of Ahsoka's fight with Vader, but you wouldn't be lost. The Mandalorian was going great for 2 seasons. Sure, season 2 had some pre-existing characters, including Ahsoka, but I would argue that none of that needed pre-required viewing. Then season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett happened, where in the 5th episode it decided to continue the story of the Mandalorian after season 2. The Book of Boba Fett will now never be a standalone show. It is required that you watch The Mandalorian. And then with The Mandalorian, it is now required that you have seen the Book of Boba Fett if you wish to understand the 3rd season. The reason I bring this all up is because the writers of Ahsoka are treating the show as a show within a cinematic universe. It is absolutely required that you watch Rebels and the Clone Wars. And when this happens, you are turning away a large number of casual viewers. No one wants to be told that you can't watch season 1 episode 1 of a show because you hadn't watched 11 seasons of Star Wars animation. In the 3rd scene of the 1st episode of Ahsoka talks to Hera Syndulla, another pre-existing character. Ahsoka tells her that she has a map to find Grand Admiral Thrawn. Because of this, Hera then asks if it's possible to find Ezra. If you had not seen the animated shows, here is what you are asking. 1. Who is Thrawn? The opening crawl told us who Thrawn is, so that's actually not a big deal. 2. Why is Thrawn missing? What happened to him? Why do people think he was dead when he could be alive? This is something that will never be addressed throughout the entirety of the season. 3. Who is Ezra Bridger? This is something that is exposition dumped on us in the next scene, but more on that in a bit. 4. Why is Ezra lost too? What happened to him and how did he end up with Thrawn? This is also something that will never be answered in this season of the show. The point here is that Ahsoka makes almost no effort to stand alone. Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels made every effort to stand alone. Season 1 of The Mandalorian made every effort to stand alone. Season 1 of Ahsoka makes borderline no effort to stand alone. In this next scene, there is a memorial service to honor the heroes of Lothal. In it, we are told that Ezra Bridger was a hero who sacrificed himself to save Lothal. Okay, cool, but not really. One of the hardest things to do in storytelling is handle exposition, because, contrary to popular belief, no one expunges the entire backstory of someone to someone who already knew that backstory. But for the context of this show, Filoni's trying to get the casual viewers on board. So in order to do that, he is just going to tell all the viewers who Ezra was. This is not good writing. Instead of showing us who Ezra was, they are just telling us who Ezra was. Storytelling is is not reading off a Wikipedia page. Storytelling is all about emotion and connecting with what is presented on screen. Now, is there a solution to this? Is there a way to catch people up on information in other shows without actually having to see those other shows and not by telling us through some silly exposition dump? Absolutely there is. I suggested this idea back in my review of Ahsoka a year ago, and I completely stand by this idea. Instead of beginning the series with this opening crawl, begin it with the final battle of Star Wars Rebels. Not even the entire battle, just the part where the whales take Ezra and Thrawn away from Lothal. On YouTube, if you look up Ezra saves Lothal, there's roughly a 2-minute video of Ezra saving Lothal. If this show just adapted that 2-minute video into live action, then so much is accomplished for the casual viewers. For one, we actually see Ezra, Thrawn, and what happened to them. Maybe more importantly than that, however, is showing us the emotional connections our characters have with Ezra. Remember, storytelling is not reading a Wikipedia page. It's about connecting with what's being presented on screen. This Hera woman clearly has an attachment to Ezra. That's cool. But if we show the moment Ezra is about to leave for a decade and we saw how heartbroken Hera was about this, we are now connecting with the character. When Hera mentions Ezra to Ahsoka, there is now meaning behind this because we saw how much Hera cares about Ezra. This is really important for your story. The other major character introduced in this episode is, of course, Sabine. I actually think this episode does a pretty good job at showing us who Sabine is. She ditches her own ceremony because she's still a rebel, she likes to do things on her own, and she's stubborn. All things highlighted nicely in these scenes. The other major part of her character introduction is her relationship with Ezra. She watches a hologram of Ezra, she has dreams about Ezra, and the supposedly strained relationship with Ahsoka is only put on pause because of her investment in Ezra. Now imagine watching all these scenes, but to begin the show we had just watched a 2-minute prologue of Sabine being devastated that this Ezra person sacrificed himself. These scenes are now less about telling the audience she cares about Ezra and more about building on a relationship previously established. But I digress. Ahsoka inevitably decides to go to Sabine for help on opening the map. Sabine and Ahsoka's relationship is supposed to be the core of the series. Now what's really peculiar about this relationship is how it relates to Star Wars Rebels. So whether we like it or not, this show is over-reliant on pre-existing material. Fine, but what's so strange about this is that Sabine and Ahsoka never interacted with each other in Star Wars Rebels. I don't think the two ever exchanged dialogue with each other, which is fine, but the Ahsoka series started out at a point where the two did try and build a relationship, it failed, and now they are trying again. I have a tough time deciding if this was a good or bad idea. I think conceptually I have no issue with this. I would be a hypocrite if I criticized the series for not standing on its own and then also criticize it for doing something not established in pre-existing material. Where I find the issues lie are with the reasons how this conflict started in the first place. So there's this scene where Ahsoka and Sabine catch up for the first time. There's some good moments here. Sabine clearly expressed her frustration at Ahsoka for being too hard on her. Ahsoka is frustrated with Sabine for being too stubborn and not respecting her wishes. All this stuff works. But when building a dynamic between two characters, and a lot of that dynamic is based on stuff that happened in the past, it's not wise to leave the audience in the dark about that information that happened in the past. For example, in the 5th episode, we learn a big reason Ahsoka struggled with teaching Sabine was because of her insecurities about being Anakin's Padawan. This is great, but it's not stated until the 5th episode. We learn from Sabine's point of view that she wanted to train to become a Jedi because of her heartbreak at what happened with her family. This is great, but we don't learn until the 4th episode that her family died, and we don't learn until the last episode that this was her motivation for trying to become a Jedi. I don't need everything spelled out to me in the 1st episode, but this is why perspective is so important. Ahsoka is supposed to be the main character. I'm assuming that because the show is named after her. We could find out in the 1st episode the motivations behind her struggle, and then as the series progresses, she wants to learn more about Sabine's struggles, and then when she learns that, the audience learns that at the same time as her. But to begin the series, Ahsoka knows why she struggled, and she knows Sabine's motivations. We, the audience, are just left in the dark. We don't have a character that we can latch onto and connect with. There are a lot of great moments in this 1st episode that allow us to learn about the characters, especially Sabine, but I don't think this episode did a good job at getting us to relate with Ahsoka. She's so emotionally distant in these early episodes. characters. While this is a perfectly fine trait to have, she doesn't need to be emotionally distant to the audience, because if she is, then we can't relate to her. This is something I'm going to continue to talk about in the next few episodes. Episode 1 ends with Sabine opening the map, then she fights Shin and gets stabbed. I don't need to harp too much on why her getting stabbed and surviving is so silly. It's been done so many times now in Star Wars, it's getting ridiculous. But let's move on to episode 2. Right off the bat with episode 2, Sabine not even needing an ounce of recovery from her stab wound is ridiculous. Here Sabine is perfectly fine and ready to go. What stories like these need to do is be very careful with what they show our characters surviving. If people in Star Wars are able to survive superhuman feats, then in the future, stakes in action sequences are lowered because we don't know what a threatening injury is to our characters. But regardless, Sabine wakes up and Ahsoka is unhappy at what Sabine had done. And through that droid, Sabine is able to get the location of where the droid came from, and off goes Ahsoka. After rewatching this entire second episode, it is clear that Sabine is a far more well-developed and interesting character than Ahsoka is. In this episode, what do we learn about Sabine? We learn that she feels like Ahsoka gave up on her. This is something that allows the audience to sympathize with her. No one likes the feeling of being given up on. We also see Hu Yang low-key roast the shit out of her by saying she has the lowest aptitude for the Force of anyone he has seen. But regardless of Ahsoka's supposed dislike of her and Hu Yang telling her she's weak in the Force, Sabine still toughens up and does what the bigger woman should do and tries to mend fences with Ahsoka. It's strange that the show is called Ahsoka, but for the majority of the season, it's Sabine that the audience relates with. I still wish that her backstory about her family and her motivation for wanting to be a Jedi was established way earlier in the story. I think this series really could have benefited from a series of flashbacks because so much of the past is what affects our characters. You know what could have been a great character beat to loosely connect to the Mandalorian? Have Bo-Katan reach out to Sabine and ask her to join in retaking Mandalore. But Sabine rejects this because the thought of her being around other Mandalorians is too painful for her. Or the thought of being at Mandalore is too painful for her, the location where her family died. This way we get a cameo from Bo-Katan, which we know Filoni would probably love. We get a reference to the Mandalorian, so there's some connectivity, but most importantly, we get more character development for Sabine. Even though I do like what they have done with Sabine in this episode, I still think they could have done more to really get us on board with her and her struggles. Now with the other half of the episode, we have Ahsoka on Corellia. There's no other word to use, so I'm gonna say it. Ahsoka is a bitch in these early episodes. Now some may say that's the point and that she has to go on this arc, but here's the thing. In order for a character to go on an arc, they need to have a flaw. Ahsoka has a flaw. She's a jerk. So far so good. But it's also important that we know that it's a flaw. Animated viewers know Ahsoka is not usually like this, but new viewers don't. So from their perspective, she's just a jerk. Think about the show The Last of Us, or the game, the point remains the same. In the beginning of the story that takes place in the present, Joel is an asshole. However, because we had the prologue where he lost his daughter, when we see him as a jerk in the present, we know that's a flaw of his. We can infer that the loss of his daughter has turned him into a bitter man, and that is why he is flawed. With Ahsoka, something similar needed to happen. Maybe we get a flashback of young Ahsoka where she's still all joyful or whatever with Anakin. Then maybe later on we get another flashback where we see her confront Vader and learn the truth that her master did turn evil. Some of you may get PTSD when I mention flashbacks because the Book of Boba Fett and the Acolyte did them so poorly, but in those two shows, the flashbacks were an overwhelming part of the series. In my version of Ahsoka, they would only be a few minutes per episode, no more than 5 minutes per se. Some may argue that showing Ahsoka learn the truth about Anakin would be fan service, and yeah, it partially would be, but I would support this decision because Anakin being Vader is the reason why Ahsoka is supposedly flawed in this show, so you kinda need to show that moment or at least show how hard it impacted her. Plus, there's nothing wrong with a little fan service as long as it serves the story. But without all that, we're just left to question why Ahsoka is so mean to poor Sabine. Towards the end of the first episode, Ahsoka said to Hera that she left Sabine just like she left Anakin. I'm not sure what point was supposed to be made here. Is she saying this was an issue? Is she saying that she has connection issues after what happened with the Jedi Temple? I don't get the point of that. So come this episode, when they are on Corellia, Hera continues to try to tell Ahsoka to be easy on Sabine. But Ahsoka is like, nah, I can just tell when someone is ready and Sabine isn't. Then for some reason at the end of the episode when Sabine calls her, Ahsoka is more than willing to take her back. Based on 2 episodes of watching Ahsoka in the show, I don't get why Ahsoka would want to take Sabine back. Sure, Sabine helped them go to Corellia, but Sabine is also the reason they have to chase after the map in the first place. So I'm not sure what Ahsoka is thinking here. Speaking of not understanding, something that is definitely lacking in general is Ahsoka's motivation in this battle in the first place. Why does she want to stop Thrawn? Why is she so invested in this whole thing in the first place? Even after watching episode 5, this isn't entirely clear. Sure, you can say Ahsoka just doesn't want another war to start. While that may be true, that is such a boring answer. Storytelling is about flawed people doing things for deeply personal reasons. You know how in episode 5 Ahsoka has that scene where she looks at all the dead clones and she's upset? What if we turn this into her deeper motivation? The reason she wants to stop the return of Thrawn so badly is because she lived through 2 wars, and all that trauma and pain is something that still lives with her. She does not want to live through another war because she firsthand knows what the horrors of war are like. That would be an excellent motivator for her, but instead we don't get any of that. A big portion of this episode is devoted to the action sequence on Corellia. Usually you want an action sequence to progress the characters in some way. The writers should have used this sequence to explore Ahsoka's trauma, somehow tie this fight into her fears about war or her fears about becoming a master. Maybe she looks at Marok, a masked dude in black armor and a red lightsaber, and that reminds her of Vader, and we see she struggles with that. But instead we get plot development and no character development. This is where I think Filoni has a lot of room to grow as a writer. A lot of these scenes just feel pointless when there is plenty of opportunity to explore the characters on a deeper level. The last thing I want to talk about briefly before we move on is world building. Even though I've stated many times throughout this video that these shows should be shows that stand on their own, I do feel they have an obligation to expand this Star Wars mythos. This could be through the Force or through world building. A lot of people hate the sequels, and fair enough, but they are a part of the canon, and I think in these shows in this post-Return of the Jedi timeline, they should try and elaborate on the world building. Because the sequels did such a shit job at explaining the state of the galaxy and what the First Order really is, I think these shows should take some time to develop that. I like hearing how the Republic is repurposing Imperial equipment, or how this one guy explains that former Imperial workers are now working for the Republic. When he says that their loyalty is to whoever is paying them, that could in the future connect with the First Order. The reason the First Order was able to rise in the future was because people were more than willing to be paid by them for work. This is not something that needs to be a major part of the show, and it wasn't. I just want to give the show some credit because I've been a little harsh so far. On to episode 3. Before I talk about anything with Ahsoka or Sabine in this episode, we need to talk about the New Republic scene. Plot points like the ones introduced here infuriate me. Hera is a hero of the rebellion. She is a general and has been actively investigating the attack on the ship in the first episode. So when she comes to conclusions and asks for help, the senators reject her because they dislike her for some reason. Senator Ziono is an asshole simply because the plot demands it. I hate this trope so much, when someone who clearly has earned the trust of others is not given that trust. Now, I can understand wanting to tie into the world building of the New Republic. A reason they allowed the First Order to rise was because they tried to avoid conflict at all costs. Here, one of the senators says as much. That's good. I wish the scene focused on that more than it did focusing on Senator Ziono and Hera shaming him for not participating in the war, which, by the way, is a really rude thing to do. On to Sabine and Ahsoka. This was a bit of a slower episode, which I don't mind at all. These kinds of episodes allow us to look deeper into our characters and see what motivates them. Now, these scenes in this episode do develop the characters, and you'd be incorrect to say they don't. We learn more about Sabine and why she struggles so much using the Force. During the dogfight, we see Ahsoka take a risk and trust Sabine, which builds the relationship and the plan works out. The issues here stem from the development not tying into the larger character arcs of the season, at least not much. Come episode 5, we are supposed to buy into this arc of Ahsoka being haunted by her past and of her former master. Also, mind you, this is the 3rd episode. Of all 3 episodes, Anakin was mentioned only once. I don't need Anakin mentioned because it's fan service. They need to mention him because his relationship with Ahsoka is supposedly a big part of her character. There's a line Ahsoka says to Sabine about anger and frustration are quick to give power. Then Ahsoka goes to Huyang and tells him how Sabine is struggling. This could have been a really good moment for Ahsoka to share some of her fears about this legacy of Jedi that she's a part of. Maybe Sabine's willingness to dig deep into her anger is something that concerns Ahsoka because Anakin was like that as well. Huyang even brings up Ahsoka's role in this Jedi lineage, but she just makes a face and moves on. The series would have been far better off if we could see Ahsoka's insecurities on a consistent basis in these early episodes. In this episode, Ahsoka is doing a pretty good job as a teacher. She's a lot more patient than she was in the first 2 episodes. She takes a risk and trusts Sabine during the dogfight, and then we see the 2 of them get along a lot better than we did before. What if instead of them getting along, there were still issues between the 2? Now, I'm not talking about Ahsoka being a jerk, I'm talking about Ahsoka being a poor teacher because of her fears. A great way Ahsoka's arc could have gone this season is that she sees a lot of Anakin in Sabine. Not so much the power levels or whatever, but the anger and the trauma about losing family. Seeing how quickly Sabine resorts to anger is something that concerns Ahsoka. Maybe deep down, Ahsoka doesn't want to train Sabine not because Sabine can learn to use the Force, but because she can't control her fear and anger, and that could lead her to the dark side. So in episode 4, when Sabine does make the decision to give Baylan the map, that could stem from Sabine not feeling welcome by Ahsoka. This way Ahsoka's flaws have consequences, and this is why she is forced to go on the character arc. This seems to be a consistent issue through most of the Disney Plus shows recently. Even the really shitty ones like the Book of Boba Fett, Mando Season 3, or The Acolyte have the same issues. The stories establish these character traits and these backstories that are interesting, but when it actually becomes time to explore this trauma on the characters and how it negatively impacts their lives, the storytellers either barely touch on it or are too afraid to touch on it at all. In Ahsoka, I'm not inventing new stuff here. We are all told these things about Ahsoka having trauma about war, Ahsoka having insecurities about Anakin, and Sabine wanting to train because she lost her family. I'm just taking what was established and actually applying it to the story to make these characters more three-dimensional. At this point in the story, I don't know why deep down Ahsoka is doing anything. Why is she training Sabine? Does she just feel guilty about not training her well before? Does she see something in Sabine that reminds her of herself? As far as I'm aware, she wants to stop Thrawn because war is bad, and she is training Sabine just because Sabine and Hera asked her to. This is surface level development, and it's a shame Filoni didn't want to go that extra mile. Moving on to the end of the episode, as Sabine and Ahsoka enter the atmosphere, we see Purrgil, the famous space whales from Star Wars Rebels. For those who had seen Rebels, this scene is really cool. When we see the whales, we instantly know what it means, and they even played the same music that played when the whales took Ezra and Thrawn. What's the issue? Anyone who has not seen Rebels has zero emotional attachment to these whales. As far as they are concerned, when the whales show up, it's just a cool scene with animals in the sky. Only afterwards does Huyang explain the significance of these whales and that they can enter hyperspace. This is a scene where they are telling instead of showing. You know what change to the series could have made this scene so much better? I know, the answer is gonna be shocking. If the prologue of the series showed the whales taking Ezra and Thrawn. As we established in the first 2 episodes, having this prologue gives us emotional context behind Ezra and Thrawn's disappearance. But now I can also say the prologue gives us emotional context behind the whales. If we saw the whales take Ezra and Thrawn away in the first episode, that means when we see them here too, not a single line of dialogue needs to be said for the audience to understand why seeing these whales here is so important. This is an example of showing over telling. Storytelling 101. I'm repeating this point a lot, I know, but I cannot emphasize enough how much my added prologue benefits the story. As it stands, episode 3 was alright. Some cool moments, but a lot more missed opportunities. Episode 4 is the best episode of the series without question. It feels like its own contained story in that it has a beginning, middle, and end. Characters make active decisions in this episode, which again is important. And sue me, the fights in this episode are awesome. But let's start at the beginning. Sabine and Ahsoka are preparing to go attack Baylan and get the map. Simple stakes. Sabine is a little nervous and Ahsoka is trying to help her. Some of the dialogue here is a bit clunky, but the scenes still work. Now, the main reason this episode worked so well was because of what was set up in the beginning. Ahsoka tells Sabine that if they can't get the map away from the enemy, then no one can have the map. More importantly, Ahsoka asks Sabine if she can count on her. Sabine says yes, and then they make their way to Baylan. This is a fantastic moral dilemma, and in a way, it's kinda like the trolley problem, except more personal. Would you sacrifice the life of a person you consider to be a brother for the safety of millions or billions of people? There are no easy answers here, and a decision must be made. So Sabine and Ahsoka along their way run into Shin and Marok. There's nothing much here to dissect. The fights are cool. The backdrop of Cetos is great for a lightsaber fight. The unique color palette of the trees along with the glows of the lightsabers works in tandem together nicely. While this is all happening, our characters are faced with a countdown timer. It's by no means a unique narrative trick, but the reason it is done so often is because it works. Not only do they need to get the map, but they also need to do it within a specific set of time. This adds stakes to the conflict, and that is always a good thing. Ahsoka inevitably finds Baylan, and this fight is the first thing that felt very different upon my second viewing. Baylan is for sure an interesting character. A lot of that is absolutely because of Ray Stevenson's performance. He adds this mystery to the character that you can't help but want to learn more. He's complex enough to where we are intrigued by his character and we want to see what he does next. Initially, when watching the show week to week, a lot of his intrigue stemmed from the audience thinking we would get answers. All series we are getting teased over and over again. What are his goals? What is his master plan? At the end of the season, the only answer we get is that Baylan is interested in the Mortiscas and what they could potentially offer. So now, knowing that Baylan's vagueness still doesn't have any answers, we're probably gonna have to wait another 2 years to get some answers, and it makes me lose interest in the character. In the second episode, Shin is talking to Baylan. She asks what they hope to find in Peridia. Baylan says some will find war, some will find unimaginable power, and some will find a new beginning. Alright, that's cool and cryptic. Do we know what any of this means? Nope. During this fight, Baylan tells Ahsoka that in order to create, we must first destroy. That's cryptic and vague, and I still have no clue what it means. Am I an impatient viewer that just wants all of the answers immediately? Maybe, but I have a hard time being invested in these answers when I have no clue when season 2 of the show is coming out. But even if there was a release date, it's a much bigger issue that TV shows need 3 years between seasons now. This is just unacceptable. I don't care about the modern streaming market. I really don't. TV shows should be able to release a season every year, maybe 2 years. 3 is unacceptable. But anyway, Ahsoka and Baylan fight. Baylan throws around Anakin's name a lot during this fight. He says that his legacy was of death and destruction, and so will Ahsoka's. Baylan is trying to play into Ahsoka's insecurities here by talking about Anakin. But here's the issue. When Baylan brings up Anakin, this is the second time in the series Anakin has been mentioned. When we get to episode 5, we learn that Anakin's legacy weighs heavily on Ahsoka. I'm gonna continue to repeat myself because this is such a big thing. Through 4 episodes of the season, aka half of the season, there is zero inclination that Anakin's legacy is weighing on her. Absolutely none. Sure, we can see Ahsoka is not as joyful as she once was, but again, that is not enough. When Baylan talks about Anakin, we need some sort of setup beforehand that this is a trigger for Ahsoka. The audience at this point has no clue how Ahsoka feels about Anakin. People who watched the animated shows can infer a few things, but even those viewers don't entirely understand. This fight is all payoff to stuff that wasn't set up. If we had been given any indication that Ahsoka is insecure about her relationship to Anakin, whether that be through a flashback, or a conversation with another character, or a moment of reflection on her own, then when Baylan tries to bait her with that, it can absolutely work. Maybe the way Baylan is able to defeat Ahsoka is because he keeps talking about Anakin, and this makes Ahsoka angry to where she loses focus, thus resulting in her defeat. Then in the next episode, Ahsoka needs to go on an arc to confront those feelings. This would work very well, but instead, we just got some vague comments about Anakin that the viewer doesn't entirely know how to interpret. Missed opportunity. But moving back to the better part of the episode, Ahsoka is defeated and Baylan confronts Sabine. This scene is perfect. The moral dilemma that was set up before is now being paid off. I know I complained that the revelation of Sabine's family dying should have been brought up earlier, but even if it was still brought up late into the season, killing off her family was a great decision. It adds a completely new layer to Sabine and her motivations. This is one of the few examples where Filoni took information about the character's backstory and actually used it to add depth to the character. It was such a brilliant idea. So the moment comes, and Sabine chooses family over the galaxy. This is great because Sabine made an active choice that revealed to us more about her character. She is not just telling us how much Ezra means to her, she is showing us. She made a human and flawed decision, and that is what good storytelling is about. Now, I will say this. In the future of Sabine's story, if this decision she made is never brought up again, I will be furious. She made a selfish decision, and she must face the consequences of that decision. I'm going to elaborate on this much more when we get to the final episode of the season. So episode 4 was the best episode of the season. There were setups and payoffs, there was good action, and there were pretty good visuals. The issues with Ahsoka's story are still there, but that doesn't take away from the other positives of the episode. But before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 12% of my viewers are subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. Episode 5 is the character arc episode. After being a bit of a downer all series, Ahsoka has a lesson with Anakin. Afterwards, she feels like she has regained her purpose and is ready to go to save Ezra and Sabine. I remember when this episode came out, I was hella confused with what Anakin's lesson actually was, and based on the other countless Reddit posts and discussions everywhere, other people were confused as well. I even rewatched my video from a year ago, and I don't agree with the conclusion I came up with in that video. Here's my interpretation of this arc, and why I don't think it was done well. I apologize for repeating a lot of what I've already said in this video, but it must be done. So Ahsoka may have some trauma from the war, but for the most part after the Clone Wars, she was doing okay. She devoted herself to helping the rebellion, and she did that for a long time. Everything changed once Ahsoka learned that her former master Anakin is alive and has turned into Darth Vader. Now because this was never shown, not even in animation, we aren't entirely sure how this affected Ahsoka. By the beginning of the Ahsoka series, she is nothing like her old self. She is rude, emotionally distant, and seems to just focus her life on stopping a war. All these negative emotions come to light when she is fighting Baylan, and since she lost and is on the brink of death, she is pondering giving up. If her legacy is one of death and destruction, and all she can offer her future Padawan is how to be a soldier, then why bother to keep fighting? Anakin is here to remind her that she is more than just Anakin's Padawan. She showed empathy during times of war, she was never proud of all the killing and battles she won, and most importantly, just because her master turned to evil, that does not mean that is the same fate for her. By choosing to live, she needs to come to terms with all of this and go back to actually living life, a life about connection. So she wakes up reborn, and after learning that Sabine went with Baylan and company to the Eye of Sion, she decides to take a risk and trust in the space whales to get her to Peridea as well. On paper, this is a really nice arc. I love the idea of the show exploring how it must feel to be a part of such a complicated legacy. So what's the problem? Pretty much everything that I've said in the video up to this point. This show has not even remotely done the legwork to set up this arc. Ahsoka's insecurities about Anakin are never mentioned or hinted at. Her fears about continuing on a legacy of destruction is not remotely hinted at all in the series, and frankly, Ahsoka pondering giving up on life because of all of this is, you guessed, not hinted at all in this series. When you have a standard character arc, here is the logical flow of that arc. The character has a flaw. We learn why the character has a flaw. Narratively, this is referred to as the ghost that plagues the character's past. Usually at the midpoint of the story or at the end of the second act, that flaw causes something bad to happen to the character. The character then learns from the failure stemming from the flaw, and then they change, having learned a valuable lesson. This new changed character is then able to accomplish his or her goal because they overcame their flaw. This is the most basic way to write a character arc. Let's now look at Ahsoka. Ahsoka begins the series flawed. So far, so good. Do we know why she has a flaw? No, at least not yet. At the midway point of the story, something bad happened to Ahsoka. That's good. Was this bad event caused by her flaw? Not that I'm aware of. It appears she just lost a fight. So after the low point of the series, when we learn why the character has a flaw, it doesn't help that we learn why the character has a flaw in the most vague way possible. But hey, at least we learned something. Ahsoka is now a changed woman. Is she able to accomplish her goals and win in the end because of her change? I guess so. I'll give the writers this and say the reason Sabine was able to use the Force in the end was because of Ahsoka's affirmation in the beginning of the last episode. And that is Ahsoka's story in season 1. This is just not a compelling way to tell a character arc. How could the previous episodes have been different to make this arc feel more organic? I already suggested some ideas that I won't repeat, but I do have a new idea. It's a change to episode 4. In episode 4, Ahsoka loses to Baylan, gets thrown off the cliff, and then Sabine gives the map to Baylan. What if we change the order up a bit? Say Ahsoka is fighting Baylan. Baylan defeats her, but she is not thrown off the cliff. Maybe she just gets injured where she is pretty much incapacitated, kinda like Anakin and Obi-Wan were in Attack of the Clones. So Sabine shows up and Baylan is trying to convince her to give him the map. If Baylan kills Ahsoka or throws her off the ledge, then Sabine will destroy the map. So Sabine is still pondering what she should do. The difference here is that Ahsoka is there to see this interaction. She is begging Sabine to destroy the map and to forfeit their lives for the greater good. But Sabine still gives the map to Baylan anyway. Ahsoka is devastated to see this. Baylan then tosses her off a cliff because she is no longer needed. And then Baylan takes Sabine away. The next episode begins with Ahsoka on her deathbed where she talks to Anakin. What does this change accomplish? For one, if framed in the right context, Ahsoka can see Sabine give Baylan the map as a fault of her bad training. If Sabine is that desperate to where she needs to risk the galaxy to be with someone she considers family, then that means she must not consider Ahsoka family, which Ahsoka can see as her fault because she was not a good master. The second thing this accomplishes is that the devastating situation is what causes Ahsoka to ponder giving up. From her perspective, the map is destroyed, Baylan is on his way to Thrawn, and there is nothing she can do. Might as well quit. In the current show, Ahsoka doesn't know what happened until after her character arc, so there was nothing that sparked her questioning if she wanted to give up. While this whole thing with Anakin is happening, as far as she knows, the fight is very much alive and she needs to go back there. With my changes, she has a reason to give up. Anakin will then teach her to keep fighting, then she will get creative and think about the whales as a mean to find Sabine and Ezra. Everything that the original show accomplished is still intact, but my version gives Ahsoka a far more effective character arc. Now, why did Dave struggle so much with this arc, or at least presenting it in a way that isn't so confusing? This may sound a little harsh, but after thinking about it for a year, it's probably the truth. During the writing of the show, Dave most likely thought about having a scene with Anakin in it, and then tried to tie a potential character arc with Ahsoka into that scene. What he should have done is have the character arc first, and then think about Anakin as a way to accomplish that arc. Dave probably wanted to show Anakin with a red lightsaber, show a young Ahsoka, and show the Siege of Mandalore so badly. Fan service came first here, and that is not a great way to approach a story. The last thing that needs to be discussed before moving on is the damn Purrgil. Can you guess what I'm gonna say? You should really be able to guess because I'm gonna be making the same point again for like the 5th time. A prologue of the ending of Rebels makes this scene so much better. If you're a new viewer, you may wonder what on earth prompted Ahsoka to think that entering the mouth of the whales would get her to Peridea. But if we saw the ending of Rebels and we saw the whales take Ezra and Thrawn away, then Ahsoka can reference this and use this as what sparked her line of thinking. Just before this happens, Hera tells Jason and thus the audience what happened to Ezra and what role the whales played. Remember, showing is better than telling. Instead of having Hera tell the audience, why not show the audience in the prologue of the series? I think this is the last time I'm gonna bring up this point, but I can't promise you that. Episode 5 had a lot of fun moments that made me smile as a fan, but the way it approached the character arc of Ahsoka was a confusing and unorganized mess. Episode 6 is a much slower episode. It doesn't have the attempted character arc of Episode 5 or the intensity of Episode 4, but here we are reintroduced to Thrawn and Ezra. To touch on Thrawn first, his introduction was great. This show has had an issue with treating important events as important, but this is not one of those examples. Since the opening crawl, we were told the goal of the enemy is to find Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now that they have found him, the scene slowly but intensely builds up to his reveal. And I gotta say, I love his first line of dialogue.
What was first just a dream has become a frightening reality for those who may oppose us.
The episode doesn't show Thrawn doing much, so we'll touch more on Thrawn when he actually does stuff. I mentioned this before when discussing episode 4, but it's time to bring it up here. Shin is continuing to ask Baylan questions about this place. What does he hope to find in this wasteland? What is this power that he seeks? What answers do we get from Baylan? More vague comments about power and starting anew. We want scenes between Baylan and Shin. These are two new characters. Them being Dark Jedi is a new concept to the Star Wars canon, so scenes where the two talk to each other to express feelings and motivations is important. Most of the scenes between these two work really well. Even though we still don't know what exactly Baylan was looking for, his personality and his relationship with Shin has certainly developed nicely. Now, the part of these scenes that I struggle with are that Baylan has no reason to keep his motivations a secret from Shin. Shin is his apprentice. He constantly talks about how he trained her to be something more than a Jedi, but whenever Shin has any questions, all she gets are vague answers from Baylan. Why is Baylan not telling her about the Mortis gods? Why is he not telling her what he plans to do with this power he seeks? Why does he not tell her what it means when he says, in order to create, we must first destroy? I know the reason why. Because the audience is watching. Filoni and the writers don't want the audience to know it yet so they can keep us intrigued week to week, or in this specific case, from season to season. This situation is akin to the Holdo situation in The Last Jedi. Why Holdo never told Poe the plan to escape to the secret base is because the audience needed to be left in the dark so there could be a good plot twist. Now, what's a little more annoying about the Poe situation is that there is an obvious reason not to tell Poe. All Holdo had to say was, last time you were told the plan, you disobeyed orders and got dozens of people killed. Why would I tell you the plan and risk you trying to sabotage it? There's a lot more details about The Last Jedi I'm not going to get into right now, but Holdo could have at least made it a bit more clear than her vague comments about Poe being reckless. In Ahsoka, if you want scenes between Shin and Baylan and you don't want the audience to find out what Baylan's plans are, then at least give us a good reason why Baylan isn't telling Shin anything. Maybe Baylan is worried that Ahsoka will find out the plan, and if Shin is captured, she could reveal that information under interrogation. That's not a bad reason. Maybe Baylan himself doesn't know what he's looking for. Maybe all he heard was that a great power resides out here, and since it is calling to him, he owes it to himself to find out what it is. Another very serviceable reason. These are all minor changes that would go a long way in not frustrating the viewers. Now, moving on from Baylan and Shin, let's talk about Sabine finding Ezra. This episode highlights one of Filoni's biggest struggles as a writer. This episode has scenes that develop the plot. Great. This episode has scenes that develop the characters. Great. But Filoni appears incapable of writing scenes that develop both the plot and the characters at the same time. And not every scene needs to develop both at the same time, but it would be nice if it happened at least once. This episode is just plot, 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 a little character, plot, 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 a little character. In the scene where Sabine fights the bandits, we see that she's resourceful and can fight, something we already knew. Sabine then finds the turtle people, and we learn that Sabine is kind, something we already knew. When you watch this episode for the first time, the episode works because you're intrigued with what Sabine will discover about this place. Will she find Ezra? What kind of life is on this planet? What else is on this planet? What do these turtle people know? What do they not know? Your curiosity is keeping us engaged. But rewatch value is also important. Rewatching this episode, it's all really slow because there is nothing of note going on. Sure, the scene where she finds the turtle people is cute. Sure, the scene where she talks to the horse dog thing is cute. But from the moment Sabine leaves Thrawn's palace or whatever, I'm just waiting for the part where she finds Ezra because that's actually a good scene. This episode could have done a much better job of building up to the moment where Sabine finds Ezra. But as you guessed, the moment she does find Ezra was sweet. You know, I always try to be super analytical here and always have my professor hat on, but even I can just enjoy a moment that's meant to serve the fans once in a while. Would the scene have been better with my suggested prologue? Absolutely, but the scene still works. Now I will say this scene and subsequently the next episode does have a great setup to something that wasn't paid off, or at least hasn't been paid off yet. Ezra in this episode and the next episode repeatedly asks Sabine, how did you get here? How did you find me? The reason Sabine doesn't tell Ezra is because she knows he wouldn't approve of her risking the galaxy to find him. I love how Thrawn emphasizes this point. She risked the fate of the galaxy to find her friend. Remember, actions should have consequences. How interesting would it be if Sabine told Ezra and he was pissed? That would make for a great character dynamic, but it never happens. Now it can still happen, but just like with almost everything else in the show, we'll just have to wait and see in season 2. Episode 6 is a much slower episode, but it had some highlights that I certainly enjoyed. The 7th episode opens with the conclusion to the Hera insubordination arc, and this arc is terrible. Let's summarize it, shall we? Hera is investigating the return of Thrawn. After finding evidence, she asks the New Republic for help. The New Republic denies her because they don't trust her for some reason. Hera then proceeds to go behind the New Republic's back anyway and get her own squadron of fighters to assist Ahsoka. This gets her in trouble where she may get court-martialed. During her trial, she's about to be disciplined, then 3PO shows up and tells the senators Leia approved this mission the whole time. Hera leaves the trial unscathed and her rank as general remains intact. So why does this arc suck? Because as far as I'm aware, none of this will have any lasting consequence. In episode 3, I spoke about the world building implications this arc has, especially when it comes to the fall of the New Republic in The Force Awakens. This is cool and all, but it can't be the sole reason for the existence of this arc. There needs to be some heavy character implications for Hera or heavy implications for the plot. Now maybe somehow they can make this relevant in season 2, but I highly doubt that. What do I say in almost every video of mine? Characters must suffer the consequences of their actions. This is what allows stories to have stakes that we can get invested in. With Hera, whether we agree with her reasoning or not, she did disobey a direct order. She did go against the military to pursue what she thought was right. What is the realistic consequence of this? That she would be disciplined. Come the trial in episode 7, how interesting would it have been if Hera was actually court-martialed? Maybe down the road, the lack of Hera's presence could leave the New Republic unprepared to handle an attack of some kind. But instead of getting anything remotely interesting, we need Hera to be bailed out by Leia because why? They don't want Hera to be court-martialed? Wasted opportunity. Now, most of the episode still takes place on Peridia, and kinda like the last episode, a lot of it here is really slow as well. So we have Sabine and Ezra chatting, which I do like, especially since Sabine is catching Ezra up on what he had missed. This is going to be a nitpick, but as a major Rebels fan, this pissed me off. I cannot believe for the life of me that Sabine didn't tell Ezra that Kanan and Hera had a child together. If I had to rank the most important events that Ezra missed while he was gone by how important it would be for him, number 1 would be the fall of the Empire, and number 2 would be that his former master and his mother figure had a child together who can use the Force. Whenever season 2 happens, this better be addressed or I'll throw a fit. But moving on to more serious critiques. During this conversation, Sabine continues to not give Ezra any answers. In the last episode it was okay, but if I was Ezra here, I would be getting pissed off. What happened to Ahsoka? It's complicated. How did you find me? It's complicated. If I was missing for 10 years and then I was found, you bet your ass I would want to know how I was found, especially if the person who found me was acting suspicious about it. Now, if this was paid off at some point, I could forgive Sabine's vagueness, but it did not pay off, so I can't forgive it. A lot of this episode is just action where Ezra and Sabine are fighting bandits. Is there anything new we learn about either character? No. Do we ever get some cool payoff to what Ezra has been up to for the last 10 years? Not really. He says the Force is now his ally and that he doesn't need a weapon to fight. That could be really cool, but all he does is push people around, and then he picks up a blaster anyway. Nothing more exciting than that. Ahsoka and Huyang arrive on the planet, and there are moments here I did like. Even though the arc she went on was rushed, at least there is a visible difference between who Ahsoka is now and who she was before. She's making jokes with Huyang, which were quite funny. Instead of killing Shin on the spot, she offers to spare her, and when she sees Sabine, the first thing she does is smile. We even get to see her laughing, something I could never have imagined Ahsoka doing in the first half of the season. Now, episode 7 is really part 1 of a 2-part finale. So instead of just addressing Thrawn's strategy in this episode specifically, let's move on to the finale and see how it all ties together. The finale features our characters trying to escape from Peridia. Where this episode got the most slack was due to Thrawn's plan. In episode 7, Thrawn learned that Ahsoka was Anakin's Padawan. This meant that he had to adjust his plan accordingly. In simplest terms, his plan was to remove any sort of randomness. He knows the Jedi. He ended up in this different galaxy because a Jedi did something completely random and summoned space whales. Thrawn will never underestimate a Jedi again. By taking out all randomness from future events, that means he can control all variables and escape easily. It should be noted that Thrawn's plan is not to kill Ahsoka, Sabine, or Ezra. That would be nice for him, but that is not his plan. His plan is simply to escape and leave the others behind. So by doing this, he plans to do everything he can to stall the Jedi. When Thrawn learns that Ahsoka has arrived in the system, he sends some of his forces to go attack Sabine and Ezra. Not because he thinks his forces can defeat Sabine and Ezra, but because he just needs to stall them. And by sending his forces there, Ahsoka will feel compelled to help them instead of going straight for Thrawn. After that first attack, Thrawn sends another attack to try to disable Ahsoka's ship. This works, but Ahsoka and company still make their way up to the top of this tower. Thrawn then sends Morgan and the zombie troopers to stall them again. This ends up working enough to where Ezra is the only one who manages to get on board. Despite a last-second effort to catch Thrawn, Thrawn is able to escape before Ahsoka and Sabine can reach him, and his entire plan was a success. What do I think of this plan? On paper, I really like it. There's something refreshing about seeing one of these villains not underestimate our main characters. In Star Wars, this happens time and time again, so I appreciated something different here. Where I struggle a bit with Thrawn's plan is that Thrawn is only as smart as the writers. If you're writing a character that's supposed to be brilliant, then you really need to go the extra mile to make sure that all your bases are covered. Because if you tell the audience this character is a genius, but then they do stupid things, that makes you as a writer look bad. I would not go as far to say that Thrawn was an idiot in this entire sequence. Again, I think the plan was pretty clever. However, there are a few little details that make us question this plan, and there are some minor changes that could have made this plan even better. Firstly, in episode 7, Ahsoka is hiding from Thrawn in the debris. Instead of letting Ahsoka just sit there and stall her, Thrawn decides to open fire on her, thus causing her to leave her hiding spot and pursue Sabine. It's a minor thing, but it completely contradicts Thrawn's plan. When you tell us your character is a genius, they are open to into this type of criticism. One criticism that people throw around a lot is that Thrawn should have just destroyed the tower, thus giving Ahsoka and company no way to even enter the Star Destroyer. I disagree with this, and here's why. Thrawn's goal is to delay the Jedi, and yes, he is also trying to keep the Jedi in a situation where he can predict their next move. Remember, he is trying to remove all randomness. By destroying the tower, the audience knows that Ahsoka and company would likely be screwed, but Thrawn doesn't know what the Jedi have up their sleeve. For all he knows, Ezra could summon space whales again. By keeping the tower intact, Ahsoka is forced to go up the tower if she wants to make it to Thrawn. In a way, Thrawn can control the path Ahsoka takes and slow her down. I love this idea and it makes sense to me. Now, some other little nitpicks that come to mind are, why did Thrawn wait to attach the Star Destroyer to the Eye of Sion? When Morgan and Baylan first arrive, why didn't Thrawn ask for the Eye of Sion to be attached right away? This way, when the Night Sisters were done loading all their cargo, the ship could just leave instead of needing to wait for the Eye of Sion to come. That's probably the biggest critique of this ending sequence, but there is one easy rewrite that you can do to make this work. Have it so the cargo is only done being loaded right as Ahsoka and Sabine are attacking. That literally solves most of the problems with this ending sequence. Conceptually, I love Thrawn's plan, but Filoni should have just done a few more rewrites to iron out any kinks. So the episode ends with Thrawn escaping and our characters being stuck on Peridia. A lot of people felt this ending was anticlimactic, and it makes sense why. Remember, I said that the series has a major problem with making the audience feel the right emotions in a specific situation, and this ending is full of that. I'm not the only person to point this out, but it was a big mistake to not show Thrawn attack in some way. The opening crawl of the series told us that Thrawn's return needed to be stopped at all costs. All series, our heroes are working together to stop the return of Thrawn. However, they failed. Now that they have failed, we need to see why failing to stop Thrawn was such a big deal. But now we'll just have to wait till season 2 to see why Thrawn is such a big threat. The other aspect of this episode that was anticlimactic was how Ahsoka and Sabine reacted to the events that unfolded. Remember, all season their goal was to stop Thrawn. They failed to do so, and now they are stranded in a different galaxy. How do they react? By Ahsoka telling Sabine all is okay and that they are exactly where they needed to be. I get this is part of Ahsoka's arc, that she would be more positive and more supportive of Sabine, and action is not always what's most powerful. Sometimes it's the reaction that's so powerful. If our main heroes don't seem concerned that they just failed their mission, then we shouldn't be concerned either. The last part of the episode that felt so anticlimactic was Ezra's return. Hera, since the first episode, has been talking about how much Ezra means to her. She spent all season helping Ahsoka so she can not only stop Thrawn, but also save Ezra. How does she react when he returns? She just stands there and does nothing. Go watch YouTube compilation videos of people reacting to family members returning home from the military. They are often in tears right away and they hug their families like they're never letting go. We don't watch these videos simply because someone returned from the military. We watch them because we want to see how the family members reacted. Hera has gone 10 years without seeing Ezra, and this is how she reacted? Now, there is actually one little change you can make if you want the scene to feel more dreadful. Say Ezra returns and then Hera rushes over him to give him a hug. Afterwards, she has to ask him the tough question. If he returned, does that mean Thrawn also returned? Ezra will say yes, and then Hera can look horrified. She loves Ezra, but she has also learned that another war is about to start. That works so much better. Endings are really important because that's the last impression you leave your audience with. A great ending can make you think you watched the best thing ever. A poor ending can make you think that what you watched was worse than it actually was. And unfortunately, while the ending of Ahsoka did have some nice moments and some wonderful music, ultimately it was anticlimactic and left a bad taste in a lot of viewers' mouths. So, that's it for all the episodes of Ahsoka. However, as I promised in the beginning of the video, I'm gonna do my own little rewrite of the series. I've hinted at a lot of different things I would have done throughout this video, so now it's time to compile all those thoughts into one cohesive rewrite. By the way, this rewrite is gonna have me keep the same episode format and the same overall plot of the season. My goal is not to rewrite the show into the story or the plot that I wanted to see. My goal is to rewrite the show to enhance what I feel the original storytellers were going for. Can you guess how this series will begin? It's gonna be a shocker, but the first episode will begin with a flashback to the Battle of Lothal. Ezra Bridger is in the Star Destroyer fighting off stormtroopers and Grand Admiral Thrawn. These giant whales come out of the sky, grab the Star Destroyer, and then jump into hyperspace. On the ground, we see our characters in shock, most notably Hera Syndulla and Sabine Wren. After their shock is shown for a few seconds, the screen will cut to black. Then on the screen you will see 10 years later, and then the opening crawl will play out. You guys know why adding this prologue is so beneficial. I won't repeat myself for the 100th time. After the opening crawl, we will see a New Republic transport heading to a New Republic ship. When the captain asks the ship for a clearance code, the code he gets is a New Republic code. Since it's friendly, they let the ship on board. However, we learn that these two dark Jedi secretly stole the Republic ship, and then they start attacking everyone on board. Baylan goes to save Morgan, and the title card shows up. My small change here just removes the part about making the New Republic officers complete morons. They are tricked instead of willingly letting suspected criminals on board. After the title card, we see Ahsoka walking through the ruins of an old temple of some sorts. This scene will play out the same way. Then she gets called to chat with Hera. Ahsoka tells her about the map and Thrawn, and then Hera asks if this means they can find Ezra too. Since we had the prologue, the audience knows who Ezra is. Hera will suggest to Ahsoka that Sabine could help her unlock the map. Then we cut to Sabine, who is dodging the ceremony and driving back to her place. When she gets back to her place, however, she will get a hologram call. This call will be from Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan tells Sabine that she recently has rallied multiple clans of Mandalorians and that they're going to retake Mandalore. The implication is that this call is being made shortly before the final few episodes of Season 3 of The Mandalorian. Sabine says she is not going to come. Bo-Katan can mention that this was her family's home and that she needs to help. And then Sabine can say in a rather emotional way, "My family's all dead, there's nothing left for me on Mandalore," and then hang up. We can tell Sabine is visibly upset, and then she takes out the hologram of Ezra, and this makes her feel better. What does this change accomplish? One, we learn early on that Sabine's family is all dead and it still really hurts her. Then, by looking at the hologram of Ezra, we can tell that the thought of Ezra is something that makes Sabine feel better. Ahsoka will arrive on Lothal, she and Sabine will chat, and the tension is still obviously there. Sabine will ask, "Are you here to take me back?" And Ahsoka will say, "No, I need your help opening this map." The same events can play out. The two will bicker, Sabine will take the map, and then Ahsoka will talk to Hera. Sabine will unlock the map and then fight Shin. Instead of Sabine getting stabbed through the chest, however, she will just be force pushed back into a wall and get knocked out. Shin will escape with the map, and that's the end of episode 1. Episode 2 is also going to begin with a flashback. In the 5th episode of the show, we got some sort of flashback of her during the Battle of Ryloth. Here we are going to get the same flashback scene. I want to show the viewers as early as the 2nd episode that Anakin was Ahsoka's master. Not only that, I want to show the audience a scene of the two chatting where Anakin gives her some really good advice. The dialogue will be a little different. Ahsoka will be a bit more positive and accepting of Anakin's advice. The point is that here I want to show a contrast between who Ahsoka once was and who she is now. Before, she was an optimistic, loving, and empathetic young girl, but as an adult, she is cold, rude, and lacks that same optimism. Before, I mentioned over and over again that we need to know that Ahsoka is flawed, but we also need to see what she used to be like. For the new viewers of the show, they're going to wonder what happened that caused Ahsoka to go from this bright young girl to this bitter old woman. But for now, that's the only flashback we're going to get in this episode. Episode 2 will then continue on where the original episode began. Sabine wakes up and mentions that she opened the map and that it was stolen. Ahsoka is visibly annoyed by this, like she was before, and she leaves to go to rendezvous with Hera on Corellia, telling Sabine that she's done enough. Sabine can still talk to Hera, and Hera will give her good advice. On Corellia, pretty much everything will play out the same way initially. During that conversation between Hera and Ahsoka, Hera will ask that Ahsoka take Sabine back on as her apprentice, and Ahsoka will say no. She will tell her what Huyang told Ezra in the original episode 8. Sabine doesn't want to be a Jedi, she only wants to gain power because of the loss she suffered with her family. Hera will disagree, but the scene will continue anyway. When the Imperial sympathizers reveal themselves, Ahsoka will jump out the window and get ready to fight Marok. However, there's going to be a moment where she looks at Marok and sees Vader. They both have red lightsabers, black outfits, and a black mask. So it's not the biggest stretch in the world that Ahsoka would see this and be reminded of Vader. It will be akin to one of those PTSD flashes some people often get. This doesn't stun Ahsoka, however. It makes her angry and we can see her go ham on Marok. I want to plant a seed here that the image of Vader is something that really haunts her and makes her lose control a bit. As we will learn later on, Anakin turning to the dark side was something that really affected Ahsoka, and it was the main reason for her change. Planting this seed in episode 2 is something I want to do. The rest of the Corellia stuff will play out the same way, and then back with Sabine, she will have that conversation with Huyang where he inspires her to make a change. Sabine is actually going to go call back Bo-Katan and see if she can still help, but Bo will say that the battle is over and that they retook Mandalore. Sabine apologizes for not being there to help, and Bo-Katan forgives her. This resurgence motivates Sabine to ask Ahsoka if she can join along. The difference here is that Ahsoka is going to let Sabine join her, but she's not going to take Sabine back back on as an apprentice. The tension is still there as they enter episode 3. So now that we're in episode 3, it's going to begin with another flashback. This one will be very quick. Do you guys remember the ending of the Clone Wars when Ahsoka and Rex bury all those clones? We will see young Ahsoka look upon all the dead clones. As this happens, there will be quick cuts to her fighting all those clones. This is played as some traumatic memory. So the point I want to get across with this brief flashback scene was to show how traumatized Ahsoka was by the end of the Clone Wars. Seeing all this death and destruction is something that haunts her. But after that, episode 3 is honestly going to be the exact same episode. The only thing that's going to change are the training scenes between Sabine and Ahsoka. Sabine is going to get training from Huyang, but Ahsoka isn't going to offer her a lesson back. When Sabine asks why she won't train her, Ahsoka can tell her the truth. She doesn't feel Sabine is in it for the right reasons and doesn't trust that Sabine can control her emotions. This frustrates Sabine, but the two still bond a bit during the entire fight. Episode 4 is going to begin with another flashback, and this is the last one to begin an episode, I promise. It's going to be a bit of a longer one, but we're going to see Ahsoka fight Vader on Malachor. Since it's an adaptation, Filoni can change the dialogue a little bit to match the themes of the Ahsoka series, but the two will fight and then Ahsoka will see Vader's face. The flashback will end and cut to present day. Considering Anakin turning to the dark side is the entire reason Ahsoka is so depressing to begin the series, I feel it is absolutely necessary to at least show it before episode 5. Just before everything goes down, Ahsoka will tell Sabine the same thing she told her last time. She will say, "I get things haven't been great between us, but I need you to destroy the map if it comes to it." Sabine will say, "Yeah, sure, you have my word." But then Ahsoka will also mention how she cannot go through another war again. She needs to make sure they don't get the map. The episode is going to go mostly the same up until the fight. Ahsoka will fight Baylan. During the fight, Baylan will say over and over again how Ahsoka will bring destruction to the galaxy just like her master did. This will trigger Ahsoka, kinda like her fight with Marok in episode 2. Ahsoka is still going to lose, however, but she won't be thrown off the cliff yet. The same rewrite I mentioned earlier is gonna happen here. Ahsoka will watch Sabine hand the map to Baylan, Ahsoka will be devastated, and then she'll be knocked off the cliff. Earlier in the video I mentioned why I thought this change makes the series so much better. She loses the fight because of her flaws, and when Sabine gives Baylan the map, Ahsoka will see this and blame herself, which is where episode 5 picks up. In episode 5, by far the most confusing part of the episode was Ahsoka's lesson. My goal here is to reword the meaning of the lesson. Instead of this live or die bullshit, I want to focus on Ahsoka learning that she is not Anakin. She is not destined to repeat his mistakes. There is no such thing as her being a part of a lineage of the dark side. When she talks to Anakin on Ryloth, Anakin is going to point out how empathetic and caring Ahsoka once was. It's going to be a callback to the flashback in episode 2, but it's also going to serve as a reminder of how Ahsoka has changed. Then when we get to the Siege of Mandalore, Anakin is going to tell Ahsoka she's a great warrior. When Ahsoka gets annoyed by this and tells Anakin she doesn't just want to be a great warrior, this will lead into Anakin showing up in his dark side form. The two fight, and then Ahsoka has Anakin on the ropes and she has the chance to metaphorically kill him, but she will refuse. Anakin tells her that she was able to resist the dark side, unlike her master. Anakin will tell her that she doesn't just want to be a warrior, she wants to be more than that. That is not the trait of someone who can turn to the dark side. Anakin will also tell her how empathetic and caring she once was, and still is. He asks her to go back to this, go back to living, not being burdened by the past. This is what sparks Ahsoka to change. She gets saved by Hera, and the rest of the episode is the same. This episode was maybe the episode that was the most important to change. The series needs to get her arc right. Hopefully my version is a lot more clear than the original episode was. Episode 6 can honestly be the same. Sure, I would have liked the action to be a bit more character focused, but my goal here is to rewrite the broad strokes of the character arcs, not every single scene. Episode 7 is going to begin with Hera on trial. At this point, all the scenes with Hera and the New Republic can be the same. Sure, the senators having zero trust in Hera is annoying, but I'm going to keep that because I want Hera to actually get court-martialed. This is going to come into play into the finale. So back on Peridia, Ahsoka will arrive and get attacked by Thrawn. On the planet, Sabine is talking to Ezra, and Ezra is getting fed up that Sabine isn't telling him anything. Sabine will finally tell Ezra the truth, and Ezra is not happy. He's not pissed enough to straight up ignore Sabine, but he's clearly not happy. Thrawn is going to keep his same tactics, sending troops to attack Sabine. Ahsoka will show up, and Sabine is shocked to see her alive. In episode 8, Ahsoka is going to talk to Sabine. She's going to apologize to Sabine about how she was before. She says she doesn't blame Sabine for the decision she made about the map. She will also tell Sabine when they get back, she will be more than happy to take Sabine back on as an apprentice. This makes Sabine happy, and they proceed to make their way to the tower. The Night Sisters are not done loading the ship yet, so they need to wait as Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra make their way up the tower. The Night Sisters just finished loading the cargo, and Thrawn's ship is about to take off. I want to remove the bit of Sabine using the Force. It didn't bother me that much, but I'd rather the moment be saved for a future season. Ezra is going to make his his way on the ship, and we see that Sabine could also get on the ship, but she decides to go back and help Ahsoka. They end up chasing Thrawn's ship, but Thrawn escapes before they get there. Right after this happens, Sabine and Ahsoka look on in horror, and that is the last we see of them. Back in the known galaxy, those ships that were at Cetos at the end of episode 5 are still there. Thrawn arrives, and he bombards the shit out of those ships, and they are all destroyed. Ezra quickly escapes, and then he meets up at a different New Republic ship where Hera is packing her things. She is excited to see Ezra, but Ezra tells her about Thrawn's attack. Hera is stunned, and the episode ends. So there's no happy ending with Ahsoka and Sabine. Instead, we have a sense of dread that not only are they stuck in that galaxy, but that Thrawn has returned and he has attacked. The series ends on a much more powerful cliffhanger, and we must wait for season 2. But we get a post-credit scene of Baylan standing on the statues of the Mortis gods, and then the episode finally ends. So that's my rewrite. I considered a much more in-depth rewrite of the series, but in this video I kind of just wanted to change Ahsoka and Sabine's arcs to make it a bit more clear and organized. So, Ahsoka 1 year later. This show hasn't aged as well as I hoped. A large part of that, no doubt, has to do with the wait between seasons. It's just unacceptable that TV shows these days need so much time between seasons. Now, is Ahsoka the worst thing ever? No, there's still a lot of good in there, just not as much as there was a year ago. And the series is still certainly better than, say, The Acolyte, The Book of Boba Fett, or the 3rd season of The Mandalorian. Check out my second channel, Star Wars Overanalyzed, where I'm currently breaking down all the Star Wars movies. I release a new episode every Friday, so go check it out. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to tonight the Claude Squad, and I will see you guys next time.